And we're back, folks. Welcome to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michel Bryant. In this case against Scott Nelson in Florida, the penalty phase, the state has rested. The most recent witness was the husband of the victim, Jennifer Fulford, Robert Fulford, who just told just a heart-wrenching story about what she was like in life. And this jury has been pounded over the head with what happened in death. You can see a live picture there in the courtroom. The mass of attorneys huddled there at the bench. Again, there are 7 of them involved here, 3 for the prosecution, 4 for the defense. Quite the show of force. And so now I'm sure they're huddling on how the defense case, if there's going to be one, is going to go forward, which means we're very close to a decision as to whether Scott Nelson himself will take the stand in his own defense in the penalty phase. I would bet on it. So in the meantime, let's take a look back at some of the information presented by the prosecution in the aggravating portion of their case for this penalty phase. And we've heard about the bank robbery, right? Well, you need to hear some of the details. This is a woman who was a bank teller at the time when this guy, you heard of the Keystone Cops? Well, Google it. It was that kind of scenario. Let's listen to what happened during the bank robbery. So here we have a couple of bank employees who went through this fake bomb bank robbery that the defendant Scott Nelson put upon them back in 2010. One of the things I was thinking about here, Norman, is that the defense said during this presentation that, hey, you know, there was nobody that was really in danger at any time, right? Because it was not a bomb. They didn't know that.
That's right. I mean, look, when you're taking something from a person, taking something from a business, it all works by your intimidation. Like people that rob people for a living, a bad day for a robber is a day where you have to put your hands on someone. A good day and a regular day for a robber is where just your mere presence makes someone give it up. This witness that's testifying about a bank robbery, I don't know if it's that he's been through so many of them that he's just not afraid anymore, or the idea of a bomb being in his branch is not that big of a deal, or if it's just the prosecutor is just not asking the questions that show that he was scared. Maybe he doesn't remember how much money he put in the bag because of the trauma connected to an incident like this.
And it is 9 years removed, but you would think, if you're at the bank and you hear there's a bomb, I'm not laughing it off. I'm freaking out. I'm stressed out, and I'm thinking I might die.
And here's the other thing. If you're the person in control, if you're the person in charge, if you're the boss, now you're worried not only about your safety, but the safety of your fellow employees. I mean, I'm sure that all banks have a protocol on what to do when violence or the threats of violence are employed to take money. There are things that you have to do, and these things are in place to keep people safe. And I just don't think the proper questions are being asked of him.
Yeah, I think I would have followed up with the defense argument by asking these folks, well, were you stressed out? Were you afraid for your life? But they didn't ask any of that stuff. Okay, let's continue, though, with some of the cross-examination. In this case, cross-exam of one of the police officers involved in the apprehension. So you can hear that this officer had a, typical experience with Scott Nelson, meaning bizarre. He offered to give up his whole story for some smokes. He talks about making his fake bomb based on garbage he found in the woods. And this was 10 years ago. So this odd behavior, this arrogance from Mr. Nelson didn't begin recently. He's been at it for some time. So Norman Williams is here with me, criminal defense attorney. We're going through this penalty phase here in the Scott Nelson trial. What does this scenario do for the jury? The hearing about the bank robbery, this officer's interaction with the defendant, what are they getting out of that?
It's almost like they're getting a little bit of icing on top of a cake, the cake being the aggravating circumstance. Just the fact that a prior felony conviction exists is enough, but to get the details just kind of drives that knife deeper into the defendant.
And you can't make up some of this stuff. Did you talk to the suspect once you, what did he tell you? Well, he told me everything I needed to know if I could just get him some cigarettes. And I tell
you what it also does as well. It will also allow the jury to scrutinize his testimony in a much different manner. Because they probably sat there thinking, why this guy's so calm? It just seems kind of strange that he's reacting this one way versus another. But to hear that, no, this is what it is. This is who he is. When he robbed the bank and I caught up to him, this is how he acted. So it kind of makes everything just kind of seem par for the course for Scott Nelson.
Yeah, and it's an ugly course. Okay, they are still working on stuff in the courtroom there in Florida. Again, the state has rested in the penalty phase against Scott Nelson, so we expect the defense to fire up. They've been playing with some electronic pyrotechnics there, maybe a FaceTime or some sort of related appearance by somebody on the defense case. So let's take a break. Good time to do that. We'll come back to the Law and Crime Network in just a moment. So that is one of 4 defense attorneys for Scott Nelson. That is Chelsea Simmons, and she is kind of what I call the search for any redeeming quality for Scott Nelson. She's laying out what he had to go through in prison, what issues he dealt with that got him into prison. Norman Williams is here. Let me ask you this. Seems to me there's a huge difference between blaming the system and alibying what got you in the system in the first place. To me, I don't want to hear about what happened if you got in prison, unless you're innocent. If you're in there innocently, that's a different story. But assuming you committed the crimes, you were convicted, now you're in prison, and things aren't nice in prison. I get that. I don't like that as an excuse. But what about the stuff that happened before he went wrong and got in prison?
Right. I mean, what went wrong before he got to prison definitely, I think, is relevant. What's interesting about him is that he went in as a bank robber, which I assume is his most serious charge. And he went into prison as a heavy hitter. Sometimes people will commit the big, heavy crimes that give you the long stretches, but they're not really heavy hitters, and they're not really ready for the consequences of their actions. And that sounds like who he is. Now, one thing about him that I will say to his defense is
wait a minute, let me write this down, because I've been looking for something. Okay.
An average person, with all things being the same, right? He would have been forced, or he would have been compelled to join the Aryan Brotherhood and to join one of the white groups. And it sounds like he didn't do that, which would have made him a victim from both sides. Black inmates, Hispanic inmates, white inmates. And because he didn't play well with others, he sought out solitary confinement, which itself is one of the most horrible things that anybody can endure. That you go into solitary confinement, a lot of times there's either creation or heightening of psych disorders. Now, another thing that I also got out of what his attorney said is this guy, he's selfish. He's selfish, he's manipulative.
Yep.
And he would do anything under the sun to save his behind. Even testify against an inmate, a fellow cellie,
right,
as they say, right?
He was a rat. Yeah.
He was a rat.
He was a rat.
I'm sure he questioned the guy, and he put himself in a position so that he could cooperate against him to try to knock down some of his time.
So you're suggesting, it sounds like to me, that despite all of that, that there is some validity to this prison aggravated his pre-existing issues, yes?
Possible, yes.
Okay. Well, if you don't believe his attorney, let's listen to the defendant himself, Scott Nelson, talking to this jury during the guilt phase about these hardships. That is the victim, Jennifer Fulford's daughter, Hannah Geist. She's teleconferencing in there to this Florida courtroom from Austin. She had a broken ankle. It was operated on last week, so she could not travel. Norman Williams, you hear these. This is what you would expect to hear. But I think it's maybe even worse when you're living remotely from the loved one you've lost, because it's harder to wrap your mind around that she's gone, because she's kind of gone on a day-to-day basis anyway, but you can pick up that phone and call. You know if you need to be there. You're a couple hours away by plane. And so it probably is harder to settle into that, realization,
Oh, for sure. I mean, and you start to say to yourself, oh, if only I would have returned that phone call, if I'd have done this.
I was too busy that time to go see her in Florida. And you can tell from this testimony, all of those things are welling up in this person because she's lost her mom.
Yeah, no, it's just horrible. It's just horrible. And it just seems like the mom was just such a kind soul, and you can tell what the type of person she was by how solid and articulate her daughter sounded.
Mm-hmm. Yep, the kids are always a good reflection of how the parents putting everything together for them. And we also heard from the son and the daughter-in-law who had a baby on the day that Jennifer Fulford was killed.
Ugh.
So, when you think about that and the family and the impact and all of this emotion, what in the heck would Scott Nelson have to say about how this crime was carried out? Well, we don't have to guess. He took the stand. This is how he described it. Oh boy, that guy is some piece of work, I'm telling you. Norman Williams is here. Have you seen, really, just take a step back. Have you seen anything like this guy?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
do tell.
Yeah, I've seen it before.
Okay, well, give me something.
Selfish people that decide that their rights are more important than the rights
That
of
they're
another
above it
person.
all, that
Yeah.
everything bad in their life that has happened to them, they're just a manifestation of all those wrongs that have been done to them.
Definitely. No, I'm this way because of this, because of what happened when I was 5, because of this, because of that.
Taking zero responsibility for anything.
It is not uncommon to have a conversation with a person that has killed somebody and that they don't want to take responsibility. They want to blame anything else and everything else under the sun. Or they want to talk about how the prosecution is corrupt, but won't talk about themselves and what they may have done. I'll give Scott Nelson, at least he admits to what he did. It's just why he did it is what he's disputing.
Yeah, that's a little fuzzy, and he's like, well, yeah, I did it. Not exactly that he's proud of it. He's just not responsible for it.
Right.
He's a product of all these bad things that happened to him.
And look, the way he testifies, taking aside what he's charged with, I don't get the impression that he's an animal, but I do get the impression that he's willing to take a risk that he may not have before he did the time for the bank robbery.
Okay. We're going to find out more about the interesting Scott Nelson. We expect him to take the stand in the penalty phase. They're still working on some technical issues in the courtroom there. I'm telling you, it's become quite the process. We are keeping an eye on it. We're going to get you back in the courtroom. There it is. You can see they've got some video. It is doing something. We're going to keep an eye on it and get you in there when it is ready to go. But for now, let's take a quick break. Come back to the Law and Crime Network. And that is the victim's son, Jennifer Fulford, the victim. That is Austin Geist, her son. And sitting next to him very quietly was his wife, the daughter-in-law, the one who gave birth on the day that Jennifer Fulford was murdered by Scott Nelson. I'm with Norman. Let me ask you this. As we head into what probably a very dramatic portion of this penalty phase, again, the anticipated testimony of Scott Nelson, is there anything he can say, knowing his personality as we think we do, is there anything he wants to do except just pontificate more and more about poor Scott Nelson?
Hopefully he won't do that. Hopefully he'll talk about the good sides of Scott Nelson, the helpful, thoughtful parts of Scott Nelson, if they exist.
Okay, well, we're going to find out. Again, this is going to continue tomorrow. They're done for the day. The state has rested in Florida versus Scott Nelson, so the penalty phase will continue first thing in the morning. Michael Bryant with you, wrapping up the afternoon. Stand by for Aaron Keller and the Daily Debrief. And, of course, you know where to find the best live trial coverage, coast to coast, gavel to gavel. That is right here on the Law and Crime Network. Good to have you. I'll see you next time right here on the network.